Melbourne University student has written to me, doesn't want their name mentioned, to complain about the university pushing its race politics on them. Now, this student is actually studying geography. It's a unit on making cities disaster resilient. But the students have been instructed that for one presentation they'll be assessed on, they should incorporate an acknowledgement of country. You know, I pay my respects to the elders, etc., even if they disagree with this racial division. Joining me is Rowan Dean, Editor-in-Chief of The Spectator Australia, host of Outsiders every Sunday at 9 a.m. and host of his own show on Fridays at 7 p.m. Rowan, this strikes me as outrageous, an attack on free speech and free conscience. It's got nothing to do with geography.
Andrew, it's not only outrageous, it is Monty Python-esque in its utter stupidity. But in terms of the outrageous side of it, any kind of political mantras, any kind of set of words or phrases that you have to say off by heart before any given sort of situation, that's the hallmark of totalitarian societies, whether it's Pol Pot or the Chinese Cultural Revolution or fascism under Hitler or communism under Lenin and Stalin and so on. This kind of reciting, getting young students and people, young kids to recite these kind of political statements is disgraceful and absolutely at odds with any kind of notion of a democratic Australia. That's the serious side to it, as well as our kids. What are we doing to our kids, Andrew? The abuse that is going on to kids throughout their entire education. One of the parts of what they're studying is resilient cities or city resilience or something or other, in which you would expect they would be hoping to compete on the world stage if they're going to be engineers or geographers or whatever they're doing. And if you are wasting time getting students to recite pointless and meaningless political slogans dreamt up in the 1970s by Ernie Dingo and others. What does that, the same week as we have a productivity summit about how to get our students and industries up and moving, I think we're heading in opposite directions. But on the comical side of it, on the comical side of it, Andrew, these poor kids, you can have two views or any number of views on Indigenous so-called First Nations history. These kids are studying resilient cities as part of their geography course and then asked to do a welcome to country. Now, you can take, I guess, the kind of Bruce Pascoe-ish view of Aboriginal First Nations history, and maybe there were these amazing resilient cities here for 60,000 years that somehow got swept away by some colonials in boats, in which case they weren't terribly resilient. So there's nothing to learn there, or else, as most sensible people believe, the indigenous nations or indigenous people were actually nomadic tribes, which didn't have cities. So why you're connecting a resilient cities program to a First Nations thing does smack of Monty Python Monty Python on steroids, Andrew.
Look, it's a culture that, Rousseau was talking about, in the 18th century, the cult of the noble savage. And speaking of that, I mean, I suspect this is also feeding into why so many of the young are backing the Palestinian cause, particularly Hamas terrorists or Palestinian extremists, and wearing their keffiyehs and going all, it's just ridiculous. But speaking of that, Rowan, I showed earlier Albanese once again having no idea at all how he would stop Hamas taking over his Palestinian state. He wants Australia to stop. He wants Israel to stop fighting Hamas, but he can't say how he would stop them. The French president now has an idea, Rowan. Emmanuel Macron, crazy man, has now said let's send in peacekeepers. He said no to an Israeli military operation, yes to an international coalition under a United Nations mandate to fight terrorism, stabilise Gaza, support its population, and establish the governance of peace and stability. It's at least the plan. Do you think Albanese will now back that plan, his own, let's recognise Palestine and all that, and send Australian soldiers to fight Hamas instead of just wishing Hamas away?
Well, again, the Monty Python absurdity of this scenario. Well done on all the comments you made and all your guests have made on this ridiculous. I love Michael Costa's comment that this is Albanese's Munich moment. This is the most idiotic.
But without the piece of paper.
Exactly. Idiotic, stupid, foolish, dangerous thing that this Prime Minister, who's done so many useless things, has actually done. And you're right. Think about where this takes us. So Albanese and Wong sit there criticizing the Israelis, one of the most advanced and technologically advanced militaries in the world, one of the most precise, at the most experienced at being able to minimize casualties, to achieve their aims with minimum loss of life on both sides. They're the experts. Now we're going to replace them with a kind of dad's army made up of Albanese, the Canadians, great work there, the French and the Brits, who amongst them could barely scrape together a couple of boats and a few tanks or whatever. They're going to rush off. We'll take our Bushmasters maybe. We're going to rush off and we're going to insert ourselves between Hamas and the Israelis, and we're going to be the peacekeepers, and we're going to sit there, and with the brilliant, maybe Wong and Albo can be the strategic masters with the table, moving the bits around the places, how they're going to bring peace to the Middle East. It is a farce. It is despicable. It makes a mockery of Australia. Never have we looked so idiotic on the international stage as we do with these clowns, Wong and Albanese, running the show. It is shameful, and worst of all, it is dangerous because it will cost lives.
The whole thing is so bizarre. I don't think I can't recall. I'm trying to think quickly on my feet, on my backside. I can't recall any other Australian Prime Minister who's been publicly praised by a terrorist group, a listed terrorist group of this country. I cannot recall it. And for that, Albanese wears that as a badge of shame. Rowan Dean, thank you so much indeed for your time.